It all began on a completely ordinary day. I had just finished unwinding after a long day at work when Ashley, my wife, stormed into the room like a tornado, her eyes alight with a kind of excitement I hadn't seen in ages. She didn't even bother to take off her coat. Before I could even say a word, she announced with a grin that I was in for a surprise. Naturally, I asked her what she was talking about, curious and a little wary. Ashley just smiled in that mischievous way of hers and said, "We're having guests over tonight. And they're bringing some really exciting news." Her voice was bursting with enthusiasm, but I couldn't help but feel caught off guard. Guests? Good news? This was totally out of left field. We weren't exactly the kind of couple who threw impromptu dinner parties, and no one in either of our families had the habit of just dropping by. Half joking, I said, "Let me guess, your friend's pregnant again?" Ashley rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck, called me an idiot, and clarified that it wasn't that kind of surprise. Then, before I could ask anything else, she declared that the house needed to be spotless before the guests arrived. Apparently, nothing less than perfection would do for her special announcement. That's when my otherwise peaceful day took a sharp left turn into chaos. I wasn't in the mood to argue, so I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. Together, we cleaned every corner of the house, polished the furniture until it practically gleamed, and prepared enough food to feed an entire dinner party. By the time we were finished, the place looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. The kitchen smelled like a feast, and despite the physical exhaustion, I couldn't help but wonder who these mystery guests were and what this exciting news could be. I've never been a fan of surprises, and this one felt especially strange. The suspense finally broke when the doorbell rang. I opened the door, bracing myself for whatever was about to walk in. But instead of family members or anyone I'd expect to bring life-changing news, it was Ashley's two closest friends, Lauren and Brittany. They burst into the room with energy and laughter, acting like they owned the place. Before I even had time to process their entrance, Lauren made an inappropriate joke, one I'd rather not repeat here, that left me standing there, stunned. My face must have betrayed my irritation because they both just laughed it off and made themselves comfortable, as if my house were their personal hangout spot. They wasted no time getting to the point. With a level of enthusiasm that bordered on ridiculous, Lauren announced, "We've both quit our jobs." My stomach dropped, and I could barely hide my shock. Ashley chimed in, confirming that she had left her position as a graphic designer, a steady, well-paying job that she had always seemed to enjoy. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious?" I blurted out. "Why in the world would you do that?" Ashley shrugged, brushing off my concerns like they were nothing. She said something about how her workplace had become boring and how she wanted more fun in her life. Fun? Since when was fun the main criteria for holding down a job? Trying to stay calm, I asked what her plan was now that she'd thrown away such a good opportunity. Before she could respond, Brittany jumped in with a ridiculous explanation that made my jaw drop. Apparently, Lauren's boyfriend had connections with some big-shot executive, and they were all invited to a party where everything would supposedly fall into place. Brittany grinned as she said, "We'll meet him there, and he'll take care of us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So your big plan," I said slowly, "is to go to some party, cozy up to this guy, and hope he magically hands you a job? You don't think there's a chance he's just a sleazeball looking to take advantage of people?" The tension in the room immediately rose. Ashley shot me a look that could kill, and Lauren rolled her eyes. "You're such a buzzkill," Lauren said. "We're going, and that's final. The party is in 3 days, so get ready." As the days ticked by, the house was filled with nothing but chatter about the upcoming event. Ashley spent every spare moment glued to her phone, texting her friends about what to wear, how to act, and even which perfume would make the best impression. It was as if their entire lives hinged on this party. One night, as I watched her obsess over every detail, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Listen," I said, my voice firm. "If you want people to take you seriously, you have to stop acting like you're auditioning for a reality show. Just be yourself for once." Ashley rolled her eyes at me, muttering something under her breath about me never understanding. I could tell she wasn't going to take my advice seriously. She was already too deep into whatever fantasy they had concocted. The day of the party arrived, and it was as though Ashley and her friends were heading to some glamorous awards show. They were buzzing with excitement as we pulled up to the venue, a sprawling mansion that looked more like something out of a movie than a place for a simple get-together. The driveway was lined with expensive cars, and the house itself was lit up like a beacon, oozing wealth and status. As we stepped inside, the place was packed with unfamiliar faces, all dressed to impress. Almost immediately, I spotted him, the so-called big shot they were here to meet. He was hard to miss, with his slicked back hair, overly confident smile, and a vibe that practically screamed arrogance. His girlfriend was by his side, quiet and elegant, but you could tell she was no stranger to these types of events. He greeted everyone like we were all old friends, but it didn't take long for his eyes to linger on Ashley. His gaze was anything but subtle, and the way he looked her up and down made my blood boil. Then his attention shifted to me. His smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of disdain, like he had already decided I wasn't worth his time. We shook hands briefly, and he leaned in with a smirk that I wanted to wipe off his face. "If you're trying to make an impression," he said smugly, "you might want to rethink your cologne." I stared at him, barely holding back my anger, before replying coldly, "If you're trying to make an impression, you might want to rethink insulting people you just met." Ashley and her friends immediately jumped in, laughing nervously and trying to smooth things over. They begged me to keep things light, saying we were here to enjoy the evening, not start a measuring contest. Reluctantly, I backed down, but not before the guy muttered something under his breath about how he was only tolerating me for Ashley's sake. That alone nearly made me snap. As the night went on, Ashley and her friends fluttered around him like moths to a flame, hanging on his every word and laughing at every joke, no matter how unfunny. I couldn't help but keep an eye on them, my irritation growing with each passing minute. At one point, I leaned over to Ashley and said quietly, "Just be yourself. You don't need to put on a show for this guy." She gave me a distracted nod, but I could tell my advice wasn't sinking in. She was too caught up in the moment, caught up in him. Meanwhile, his girlfriend sat nearby, calm and composed, watching the scene unfold like she'd seen it all before. Her quiet detachment only made me more suspicious. She didn't seem jealous or threatened, she seemed resigned, like she knew exactly what kind of man she was dealing with. Eventually, the conversation turned to business. People were eager to hear about this mysterious opportunity he'd been hinting at all evening. He played his part well, tossing out vague promises about high-level positions and life-changing careers. Then, with a flourish that felt entirely too rehearsed, he announced that Ashley and her friends were officially hired. The three of them lit up like they'd just won the lottery, their faces glowing with excitement and disbelief. But I wasn't convinced. Something about the whole thing felt off, like it was too easy, too perfect. I stayed quiet, watching the scene unfold with skepticism. Needing a moment to myself, I stepped outside to clear my head. The night air was cool, and I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my chest. A few minutes later he joined me, lighting up a cigarette and exhaling a cloud of smoke. "Maybe I was a little harsh earlier," he said, though the smirk on his face suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "But you really should lighten up. Say thank you. Your wife just landed the best job of her life, probably better than yours." I turned to him, my voice steady. "I'm here for my wife, not you. If you want respect, maybe try treating people like humans instead of pawns in your little game. Just a thought." He shrugged, clearly unbothered by my words, and muttered something about me being difficult before heading back inside. When he rejoined the party, he climbed onto a chair and tapped his glass for attention. "Listen up, everyone," he called out, his voice booming over the music. "In 2 weeks, we're hosting a top-secret corporate event. Details to follow, but trust me, it's going to be unforgettable." The room erupted into cheers, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeply wrong about all of this. Still, I kept my thoughts to myself. Ashley seemed genuinely happy, and I wasn't about to ruin the evening for her. When the party finally wound down, we said our goodbyes and headed home. In the car, Ashley couldn't stop gushing about the night. "Wasn't it amazing?" she said, practically bouncing in her seat. "I met so many incredible people. It's like a whole new world." I didn't share her enthusiasm. Instead, I leaned back against the headrest and said bluntly, "I learned something tonight, too. How to hate someone in under a minute." Her smile faded, and she crossed her arms defensively. "Why do you always have to do this?" she snapped. "A lot was riding on tonight, and you couldn't just let it go. You had to turn it into a competition." "If I didn't speak up, I wouldn't be your husband," I shot back. If you're into spineless men who let people walk all over them, maybe that's the crowd you belong with." Her cheeks flushed with irritation, and we drove the rest of the way in silence, the tension in the car thick enough to cut with a knife. Over the next few days, the tension between Ashley and me lingered like an unwelcome houseguest. Our conversations were clipped, our interactions stiff. It felt like we were sharing the same space but existing in completely different worlds. Eventually, she broke the silence. One evening, she approached me with an apologetic tone, her hands clasped nervously. "Look," she said softly, "I've been thinking about it, and maybe you were right. I shouldn't have brushed off your feelings so quickly. I know I've been too focused on everything else." It wasn't much, but it was her way of trying to make peace. And for the sake of our relationship, I accepted it. Things seemed to settle back into some semblance of normalcy, at least for the time being. Then came the news that Ashley had been waiting for. One afternoon, she received an email confirming her start date for the new job. When she told me, her voice was practically buzzing with excitement. "I got it," she exclaimed, holding up her phone like it was a golden ticket. "I start next week." I congratulated her, but deep down, I couldn't shake the unease that had been building ever since the party. There was something about the entire situation that didn't sit right with me. Still, I kept my reservations to myself. Ashley seemed so genuinely happy, and I didn't want to rain on her parade. Her first day at work came and went, and she came home glowing. "It was amazing," she said, bouncing on her heels like an excited teenager. "The office is gorgeous, and I'm in the same department as Lauren and Brittany. It's like a dream come true." I nodded, doing my best to share in her excitement, but then she dropped a detail that stopped me in my tracks. "Oh, and guess who's the department head? That guy from the party. His girlfriend is the deputy manager." I stared at her, letting the information sink in. "So the guy who spent half the party staring at you and making digs at me is now your boss?" "Sounds ideal," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Ashley frowned, clearly not amused. "It's not like I'll be working directly under him," she said, brushing off my concern. "He oversees everything, sure, but we'll hardly interact. Besides, his girlfriend is really nice. She even stopped by my desk to introduce herself." "Nice," I said flatly. "If he so much as steps out of line, you tell me. I won't let anyone treat you like some kind of office decoration." Ashley rolled her eyes. "You're overreacting. Nothing's happened, and you're already acting like you need to jump in and play hero. Let me handle it, okay?" I wasn't convinced, but I decided to back off, at least for now. "Fine," I said, my tone firm. "But if something does happen, you let me know immediately." She nodded, giving me a faint smile. "Don't worry. He's my boss, and I'll deal with him. You don't need to get involved unless there's a real reason." Her words were meant to reassure me, but they only added to the knot in my stomach. As she got ready for bed that night, I watched her carefully, trying to gauge if there was more she wasn't saying. Before turning out the light, she glanced at me and said softly, "Just don't start anything, okay? Promise me that much." "I'll try," I replied. "But you know me, I don't let things slide." A few weeks passed, and things seemed to fall into a routine. Ashley settled into her job, and though I still had my reservations, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Then one morning, as she was getting ready for work, she brought up the company's upcoming corporate event. "Remember that party I mentioned?" she said, pulling her hair into a neat bun. "It's happening tonight after work. The whole department is staying late to celebrate, and there might even be people from other teams. It's supposed to be a big deal." She looked genuinely excited, but I kept my expression neutral. "If anyone crosses a line," I said flatly, "call me. I mean it." She laughed, brushing off my concern. "Relax," she said. "It's just a work event. Everything will be fine." I wasn't entirely convinced, but I didn't push the issue. I knew how important it was for her to fit in and make connections at work, even if I didn't trust some of the people she was associating with. Still, I made it clear that I was just a phone call away if she needed me. Ashley gave me a quick hug before heading out the door, her heels clicking against the floor as she left. "Don't worry," she called over her shoulder. "It's just another normal evening." But as the hours dragged on, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. I tried to distract myself, keeping busy around the house, but every so often I'd glance at my phone, waiting for an update. By the time the party should have been winding down, I decided to check in. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. My stomach tightened. Maybe she was just caught up in the moment, I thought. But as the hours ticked by and she still didn't answer, my patience wore thin. When the clock struck midnight, I was pacing the living room, phone in hand, debating whether I should drive over there myself. Then, finally, the front door creaked open. Ashley stumbled in, clearly drunk. Her hair was a mess, her makeup smudged, and the stench of alcohol clung to her like a second skin. "Looks like you had a great time," I said dryly, crossing my arms as I leaned against the wall. She mumbled something incoherent before slurring, "I'll tell you everything in the morning. I'm too tired now." Before I could respond, she collapsed into my chest, burying her face against me. I sighed, scooping her up and carrying her to bed. Whatever had happened could wait until morning. The next morning, I woke up to Ashley shaking my shoulder, her voice a mix of excitement and nervous energy. "You won't believe what happened last night," she said, practically bouncing with enthusiasm. Still groggy, I sat up and rubbed my eyes. "All right," I muttered. "What's so unbelievable?" She launched into a detailed recount of the party, describing how lively and extravagant everything was. According to her, the company sure knew how to throw a celebration. Then, with a laugh that felt a little too forced, she casually dropped a bombshell. "Oh, and don't worry about that guy," she said, referring to her boss. "He was glued to his girlfriend the entire time. But get this, the night ended with a swinger event. Can you imagine that?" I froze, blinking at her in disbelief. "Eh, what?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. Ashley laughed nervously, waving her hand as if it were no big deal. "Relax," she said. "I didn't stick around for that part. I left as soon as things started getting weird. But Lauren and Brittany, they stayed. Apparently, it was wild." I could feel the anger rising in my chest. "You're telling me your workplace hosted a swinger party, and you think that's funny?" I asked, my tone cold. Ashley rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed at my reaction. "I told you I didn't participate," she said. "Why are you making such a big deal out of this? It's not like I'm the one who organized it." I crossed my arms, staring her down. "Let me make one thing clear," I said firmly. "From now on, you're not going to these after-hours events. I don't care if it's just drinks or some harmless gathering. If this is the kind of culture they're encouraging, I don't trust it." Her expression shifted to one of offense. "You don't think I can control myself?" she snapped. "This isn't about you," I shot back. "It's about the company you keep. If they're normalizing this kind of behavior, then I want nothing to do with it. And frankly, neither should you." The argument escalated quickly. She accused me of being overprotective, of not trusting her. I stood my ground, repeating that I didn't trust the environment she was putting herself in. Eventually, we both grew tired of going in circles, and the conversation fizzled out. But the tension lingered, thick and oppressive, as if the argument hadn't really ended, just been put on pause. A few weeks passed, and life settled back into a fragile routine. Then one evening, Ashley came home unusually excited. She dropped her bag by the door and practically sprinted into the kitchen, her face lit up like she'd just won the lottery. "You won't believe this," she said, her voice brimming with energy. "We've been given a huge project at work. We're designing new metro tickets for the city, an actual government contract. And the best part? It's just me, Lauren, and Brittany handling it. Can you imagine how big of a deal this is?" I nodded, trying to match her enthusiasm. "Sounds impressive," I said. "Just be careful, all right? I still don't trust some of the people you're working with. They've been a bad influence before." Ashley rolled her eyes, brushing off my concern as if it were nothing. "Oh, come on," she said. "That was a one-time thing, and it wasn't even me who was involved. Who are we to judge others anyway?" I let it go, but her words didn't exactly put me at ease. Over the next several days, she started coming home late more often than usual. Every time, she had the same excuse: the project's taking up so much time. "We're making real progress, though. It's going to be amazing when it's done." I didn't push too hard, but I reminded her not to lose sight of her priorities. The late nights were piling up, and I wasn't sure this project was worth the toll it seemed to be taking on her. She assured me she had everything under control, and for the moment, I decided to trust her. Then, one evening, she brought up something new. "You won't believe this," she said, her voice tinged with excitement and nervousness. "This project might be our ticket to a promotion. If it's successful, it could all line up perfectly with our boss's birthday. His girlfriend told us about it and suggested we make it special." I raised an eyebrow, already suspicious. "What do you mean by special?" I asked. Ashley hesitated, then smiled. "She wants me to bake him a huge birthday cake. You know I love baking. It's my dream to work with professional equipment. Her family owns a bakery, and she said I could use it to make something amazing. It's all arranged." I sighed, my concern growing. "That's a lot to juggle," I said. "This project and now a massive cake? How are you going to manage both?" Ashley waved off my concern with a confident smile. "It'll be fine," she said. "Besides, his girlfriend's helping me. She's really sweet and just wants everything to go smoothly. Honestly, it's a win-win." Her reasoning sounded logical enough, but something still didn't sit right with me. "All right," I said finally. "Do what you think is best. Just don't let anyone take advantage of you." She nodded, her enthusiasm undimmed. "Don't worry," she said. "I've got this." A week passed, and Ashley's schedule only got busier. Late nights became the norm, and it felt like I barely saw her anymore. Then one evening, as we were sitting at the kitchen table, she dropped another surprise on me. "Listen," she said, her voice tentative. "The boss and his girlfriend might come over soon. She and I have become pretty good friends, and I think this could be a great opportunity for us. Having strong connections like theirs is invaluable." I stared at her, unsure of what to say. Before I could respond, she added quickly, "It's just a harmless gathering. You'll be here too, so you can keep an eye on things. Just promise me you'll be polite, okay? No sharp comments." I could tell she was serious about this, so I reluctantly agreed. "Fine," I said. "But don't expect me to play host if he acts like a jerk." As the day of their visit approached, we both got to work preparing for their arrival. Ashley spent hours cleaning the house from top to bottom, making sure everything was perfect. Meanwhile, I focused on the food. I decided to go all out and called my dad, who ran a small ranch, for some advice. He always had the best cuts of meat and knew exactly how to marinate them to perfection. With his guidance, I put together a meal that was sure to impress. By the time everything was ready, the house was spotless, and the smell of marinated meat filled the air. The grill was fired up, and I was determined to make sure this evening went as smoothly as possible. When the doorbell rang, Ashley practically sprinted to answer it. In walked her boss and his girlfriend, right on time. The moment he stepped through the door, he scanned the room with a critical eye before making a comment that rubbed me the wrong way. "Nice place," he said, though his tone made it sound more like an insult than a compliment. Before I could respond, his girlfriend smacked him lightly on the arm and laughed. "Behave," she said, diffusing the tension with ease. I couldn't help but smirk a little. At least someone knew how to keep him in check. We moved to the backyard, where the grill was ready to go. As the food cooked, the aroma seemed to win everyone over. His girlfriend complimented the meal immediately, cutting into her steak and declaring it delicious. "This is amazing," she said with genuine enthusiasm. But, of course, her boyfriend couldn't let it go without adding his 2 cents. "It's interesting," he said, poking at his steak with his fork. "Maybe a bit dry." I didn't miss a beat. "Well, your girlfriend doesn't seem to think so," I replied, nodding toward her. She looked up from her plate and smiled. "It's perfect. Relax, sunshine." That shut him up, though I could tell the comment stung a little. For the rest of the meal, he kept his critiques to himself. As the evening went on, the conversation turned more casual. We talked about work, upcoming projects, and some light office gossip. But I couldn't help noticing the way he kept glancing at Ashley. It wasn't subtle, and it was starting to get under my skin. Finally, I decided to confront it head-on. "Is something wrong?" I asked him directly. He looked startled, clearly not expecting me to call him out. "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. "It's just those earrings your wife's wearing. They remind me of a pair my mother used to wear. The explanation felt flimsy, but before I could press further, he changed the subject. Your wife is incredibly hard-working, he said, turning to me with a smile I didn't trust. She's been staying late at the office, and her dedication hasn't gone unnoticed. If things keep going this way, I wouldn't be surprised if she gets a promotion soon. Ashley's face lit up at the comment. Really? She asked, her excitement obvious. He nodded, still smiling. Absolutely. By the time they left, the evening had gone about as smoothly as I could have hoped. There were no major conflicts, and Ashley seemed genuinely pleased with how everything had turned out. As we stood by the door, waving them off, she turned to me with a satisfied smile. See? That wasn't so bad, she said. I nodded, but my mind was still turning over some of the things he had said and done. For now, I decided to let it go. They drove off into the night, leaving us in the quiet of our home once again. The day finally came when Ashley was set to deliver the birthday cake she'd been working on so tirelessly. That morning, she was practically glowing with excitement. The cake was stunning, layers upon layers of intricate detail, like something you'd see on a baking show. She carefully packed it into a large box, her hand steady despite the obvious thrill coursing through her. Today's the day, she said as she double-checked the box. They're going to love it. He's hosting a big corporate party afterward, and this cake will be the centerpiece. Her words immediately set off alarm bells in my mind. Something about the whole situation made my stomach twist. I tried to keep my voice steady as I said, "Promise me one thing. Just drop off the cake and leave. Don't stick around for anything else." Ashley hesitated for a moment, her expression flickering with something I couldn't quite place. But then she nodded. "Fine," she said, though her tone was a little too casual. "I'll just hand it off and go. No big deal." With that, she grabbed the box and headed out the door, leaving me standing there with a sinking feeling I couldn't shake. The hours ticked by, and I tried to distract myself, but as afternoon turned into evening, my unease grew. Ashley had sent a single text earlier, saying she was delivering the cake, but there had been no word from her since. By now, I was used to her late nights, but something about this silence felt different, wrong. I tried calling her phone. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. By the third attempt, my patience had worn thin, and my mind was racing through every worst-case scenario. Where was she? What was she doing? Why wasn't she answering? And then, just as I was about to head out and start searching for her, my phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. I answered quickly, my voice sharp with worry. "Hello." On the other end was a man's voice, dripping with mockery. "Hey man," he said, barely containing his laughter. "You're not gonna believe this, but your wife just got a big promotion. She's really celebrating it, if you know what I mean. Why don't you come down here and see for yourself? Maybe congratulate her while you're at it." Before I could respond, he hung up, his laughter echoing in my ears. I stood there, frozen, my blood running cold. The tone, the words, it all felt like a slap in the face. Whatever was happening, I knew I couldn't ignore it. Pacing the room, I tried to think clearly, but my anger and fear clouded my thoughts. Then my eyes landed on the garage door. An idea sparked, a desperate, impulsive idea, but one that gave me a strange sense of purpose. Years ago, my dad had given me a canister of bear spray, a massive one designed for emergencies. It had been sitting in the garage ever since, untouched but still usable. I opened the garage and rummaged through the shelves until I found it, tucked away behind some old tools. The weight of it in my hands was oddly reassuring. I checked it carefully, still in perfect condition. My dad's words echoed in my head. Better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. I wasn't entirely sure what I was walking into, but I felt better knowing I had something to even the odds if things turned ugly. The next step was figuring out where she was. I didn't have an exact address, but I knew enough about her office and the kind of venues they rented for events to make an educated guess. It wouldn't take long to find her. Grabbing my keys and double-checking my phone, I slid into the driver's seat, my heart pounding as I started the engine. Anger, worry, and determination swirled inside me, but one thought cut through it all: I needed to know the truth. When I pulled up to the building, I could see the chaos through the large windows. The scene inside wasn't what I'd call a corporate party. It was something far wilder, far less professional. People were sprawled across furniture, drinks in hand, and some were blatantly crossing boundaries that had no place in any workplace setting. The music was deafening, and the atmosphere was thick with the stench of alcohol and desperation. My stomach churned as I stepped out of the car, gripping my phone tightly. I made my way inside, the noise hitting me like a wave. I scanned the room, searching for Ashley, but she was nowhere to be seen. Instead, I spotted a man leaning against the wall, laughing at something on his phone. Without hesitation, I approached him. "Where is she?" I demanded, my voice low but firm. The man blinked at me, confused, until I clarified. "My wife. Where is she?" When he didn't answer fast enough, I leaned in closer, my tone ice cold. "If you don't tell me right now, I'll break your face." "Your choice." The threat worked. He pointed toward a back room, stammering, She's in there. With some people." I didn't waste another second. Pushing past him, I made my way to the room he'd indicated. My heart was pounding, a mix of anger and dread surging through me as I reached the door. The muffled sounds coming from inside confirmed my worst fears. Pulling out my phone, I hit record. I didn't know what I was about to see, but I knew I needed evidence. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. What I saw froze me in place. The room was dimly lit, and the scene before me felt like something out of a nightmare. There was Ashley, surrounded by several men, including her smug boss. She was laughing, covered in some kind of liquid, completely immersed in whatever was happening. It wasn't just inappropriate, it was outright humiliating. They were so caught up in their twisted little game that no one even noticed me standing there, phone in hand, capturing every second of it. Each moment felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. The betrayal, the sheer disrespect, it was all too much. My grip tightened around my phone as I recorded everything, knowing I'd need this later. But right now wasn't the time for confrontation. Not yet. Once I had enough footage, I backed out of the room as quietly as I'd entered. My mind was racing, my chest tight with anger and disbelief. I needed to think. I needed to act. Heading back to my car, I grabbed the bare spray canister I'd brought along. The weight of it in my hands was grounding, a reminder that I wasn't powerless, no matter how powerless I felt in that moment. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I made my way back into the building. The chaos of the party hadn't stopped. If anything, it had only gotten worse. People were laughing, drinking, and dancing with a reckless abandon that made the entire scene feel surreal. Ignoring the stares and laughter of the partygoers, I found a central spot in the room and set the canister on the floor. Without hesitation, I pulled out my knife and punctured the canister with a swift, decisive motion. The pressurized spray erupted instantly, filling the room with a choking, blinding mist. Within seconds, the party dissolved into chaos. Screams and coughing echoed as people scrambled for the exits, their carefree night brought to an abrupt and messy end. I stood there for a moment, watching the chaos unfold, before turning and heading for the door. The fresh air outside hit me like a slap, clearing my lungs and my head. Tossing the now empty canister into the back seat of my car, I leaned against the hood, letting the adrenaline work its way out of my system. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of what I'd just done. The events of the past hour felt unreal, like a terrible dream I couldn't wake up from. But there was no time to dwell on it now. I'd done what I needed to do. It was time to go home. The drive back was a blur. My mind replayed everything I had seen, every detail of Ashley's betrayal burned into my memory. The phone with the recording sat on the passenger seat beside me, a silent witness to the night's events. Despite the anger and hurt simmering inside me, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I knew what I needed to do next. When I got home, the house was dark and quiet. The contrast between the stillness here and the chaos I'd just left behind was almost jarring. But instead of feeling comforted, I felt hollow. This wasn't my home anymore, not the way it used to be. Everything it represented had been tainted by Ashley's choices. The next morning, while Ashley was still absent, I began packing up all of her belongings. Clothes, shoes, accessories, everything went into bags and boxes. I didn't hesitate, didn't second-guess. Each item felt like another piece of her betrayal, and I was determined to rid myself of it all. Once everything was packed, I took the bags out to the dumpster behind the house. Watching them disappear into the pile of trash felt strangely cathartic. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. Next, I turned my attention to the valuables in the house. All the cash we had saved together. I hid it in a secret compartment behind a false panel in the basement, a spot Ashley didn't know existed. Her jewelry followed, each piece tucked away with care. Finally, I gathered the electronics, laptops, tablets, anything of value, and locked them in the garage. She wasn't going to have access to anything she could use to manipulate the situation further. By the time I was done, the house felt noticeably emptier. Her absence was already starting to take hold, but instead of sadness, I felt a growing sense of resolve. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, cutting out the toxicity that had taken root and moving forward on my own terms. Later that evening, Ashley finally returned home. The moment she stepped through the door, her expression changed. She froze, her eyes darting around the house, taking in the empty spaces where her things used to be. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice sharp with confusion. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I gestured for her to sit down at the kitchen table. "Sit," I said firmly. She hesitated, clearly sensing the seriousness of the moment, but eventually complied. I pulled out my phone, holding it in my hand but not yet showing her the recording. "Let me tell you a story," I began, my voice steady and cold. "Once, there was a wife who thought she could outsmart her husband. She lied to him, betrayed him, and even baked a cake for her lover. But what she didn't know was that her husband wasn't as blind as she thought. He found out everything. He even recorded it." With each word, her face grew paler. By the time I finished, she looked like she might faint. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "I don't know what you think you saw, but it's not true. It was a joke, a prank. You're taking this way too seriously." Her excuses only fueled my anger. "A prank?" I repeated, my tone icy. "Do you expect me to believe that? Your things are already in the trash, Ashley. You can leave any time. I'm done with your lies." Ashley shot up from her seat, her voice rising in desperation. "You can't just throw me out. This is my home too. We can talk about this. Please, just let me explain." But I wasn't interested in hearing her out. The images from last night were burned into my mind, and no amount of talking was going to change that. "You're done here," I said flatly. "There's nothing you can say to fix this." Her voice cracked as she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand. It wasn't what it looked like. I made a mistake, but it doesn't mean anything. We can work through this." I shook my head, unmoved by her display. "It means everything," I replied. "And we can't work through it. It's over." Her desperation turned to anger in an instant. She started yelling, accusing me of being heartless, unreasonable, and unwilling to forgive. But I stood firm, refusing to be swayed by her outburst. At one point, she screamed so loudly that her voice broke, then grabbed a chair and hurled it across the room in frustration. It slammed into the wall with a loud crash, but I didn't flinch. Finally, I opened the door and pointed outside. "Leave," I said firmly. "Now." Ashley stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, her face a mix of fury and defeat. Then, without another word, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was deafening, but it was also liberating. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was alone with my thoughts, free from the weight of her lies. I locked the door, leaning against it as I let out a deep, steadying breath. It was over. And now, I could begin rebuilding my life. The next day, I wasted no time putting the final pieces of my plan into motion. I sat down with my phone and reviewed the footage I had recorded. As painful as it was to watch, I knew there was one more person who needed to see it, his girlfriend. The one who had stood by his side, unaware of the man she was dealing with. She deserved to know the truth, and I was going to make sure she got it. I found her number through some old messages and composed a brief text. I attached the video, my thumb hovering over the send button for a moment before I pressed it. The message was simple. "You need to see this. You deserve to know who you're dealing with." It didn't take long for her to respond. My phone buzzed, and when I answered, her voice trembled with a mix of shock and anger. "I can't believe this," she said, clearly trying to process what she had just seen. What am I supposed to do now? I didn't sugarcoat my response. You know exactly what you need to do, I said. Take this to your CEO. Send it anonymously if you have to, but make sure the company knows the truth about him. There was a moment of hesitation on her end, but then she said, "All right. I'll handle it." The following day, she called me back, and this time, her tone was different. Steady. Resolute. "I did it," she said. "I sent the video to the CEO last night, and they're already taking action. They called me into a meeting this morning, and it looks like they're not wasting any time." She went on to describe the fallout. Her boyfriend, now her ex I assumed, had been terminated on the spot, along with Ashley, Lauren, Brittany, and several others who had been involved in the scandal. It was a clean sweep, as she put it. The company was clearing out everyone tied to the mess. "Sounds like the company's finally doing the right thing," I said. "What about you? How are you holding up?" She hesitated, then admitted something that surprised me. "They offered me the department head position," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "I didn't expect it, but they said they need someone they can trust to rebuild the team." "That's incredible," I said, genuinely happy for her. "You deserve it. Make the most of it." As the conversation continued, she surprised me with another suggestion. "You know," she said, "we're going to need a lot of new people to fill the gaps. If you're interested, I could put in a word for you. You've clearly got the kind of mindset this place needs." Her offer caught me off guard. The idea of working at the same company that had been the backdrop for so much drama wasn't exactly appealing, but the chance to start fresh, to rebuild something better, was hard to ignore. I told her I'd think about it. Over the next few days, I gave her offer serious consideration. In the end, I decided to take the leap. It was an opportunity to turn a terrible situation into something positive, and I wasn't going to let it pass me by. Before I knew it, I was part of the team. The work was challenging but rewarding, and the atmosphere felt completely different from what I had expected. With her in charge, the department was thriving, built on professionalism and mutual respect. Slowly but surely, I found my rhythm, contributing to projects and earning the trust of my new colleagues. As weeks turned into months, I began to reflect on how far I'd come. What had started as one of the darkest periods of my life had turned into a chance for renewal. I had shed the toxic elements that had weighed me down and stepped into a role where I could truly thrive. The bitterness and anger that once consumed me began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence. The day the divorce papers were finalized felt like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. Sitting across from Ashley in the courtroom, I felt no regret for what was about to unfold. The evidence I'd collected spoke louder than any argument she could make. By the end of the proceedings, everything we had built together, the house, the savings, was now mine. She left the courthouse with nothing but a suitcase and a ride to her mother's house. I sold the house shortly after, wanting nothing to do with the memories it held. The money went toward a new property in a quiet area, far from the drama that had plagued my life before. The new house became my sanctuary, a place where I could rebuild on my own terms. Looking back, I realized the choices I had made, no matter how painful, had led me to a better place. For the first time in years, I felt optimistic about the future. I wasn't defined by what had happened. I was defined by how I had chosen to move forward. Thank you for visiting my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.